I saw a lot of discussion online about how Pathfinder 2e is impossible to run in person without running a version of Foundry to track all the conditions for you, and track initiatives and positions and all that stuff. And generally, a lot of sentiment that in-person play is impossibly difficult. I think that is wrong. I'm not even going to call it a difference of opinion. I'm going to call it wrong. And let me show you what I do for my in-person game. And so I'm going to try and split this up into sections. And it'll start with the things I have most satisfying solutions for, and then get gradually less satisfying as the video goes on. Because I don't know how to make these things other than listing. So, you can see that that last one is conditions at the end of the video, which is down there on the bar probably. I don't know how long this segment's going to be, but the reason I don't worry about tracking conditions that much and I don't have a satisfying solution is because I never had a problem with it in my in-person game. And there are a few things I did to make it not become a problem, but those answers are likely not going to be satisfying. Anyway, I think I'm getting ahead of myself. The first thing I want to talk about is the digital tools I still actually use. Because despite being a fully in-person game, we do still like to use online tools. And the three I'm going to shout out are Path Builder, because when you are playing a game with variant rules, it's really helpful to have a rule checker nearby that calculates the modifiers. And if you have players that are not as mathematically inclined, they can click the roll button, click the button there, and then it displays the total result here. And you then have them add up whatever other extraneous modifiers they may have, like a +1 from an Inspire Courage, and then they tell you that number. It makes life a lot easier. And so we use Path Builder, because no other sheet can really have you pop up and then see the full rules of something. What other thing will let you click on a skill and then see all the ways to use it? Like, as a character sheet, I think Path Builder is the preferred character building app for my group, at least, and I think for the community as a whole. So yeah, we use Path Builder. Some players do like to play with physical sheets, so they will go into menu and they will click character sheet PDF. And then it will generate out a character sheet PDF for you that you can then print. This will not have like all your feats listed, especially if you're running a lot of like variant rules, but or like it won't have all the feats listed out with what they do here, but it will have the names of all them here, so you can then use Archives and Ethos to look them up, or if you just have them memorized. But this is a very convenient way to have a character sheet. So we use Path Builder on the player side. On the GM side, I like to use PF2e.tools for my creature making, because it has all of the game mastery guide rules for building creatures in here. And then I can import whatever numbers I want, type in my abilities, and then I can make a shareable link that can then, boom. I now have a link where I can send this creature to anybody else. I'm running this game with some other GMs, so I can prep a creature, copy this link, paste it, and it is templated very nicely. I'm not going to print off every single stat sheet that I use because that would get unwieldy. I also don't want to carry all of my bestiary books to where I have my game because that's not in my house. So I use Archives of Nethys. And I'll frequently do a level filter and a bunch of trait filters to then get to what I want to run. But that's it for the online tools. I don't use anything more. Hey, it's editing me coming in here to say, that segment may have given you the impression that it is impossible to run an in-person game without those digital tools, but if you have players that are rule savvy or you want to spend the extra time checking character sheets, you can totally run a game in person without Path Builder. If you want to write down custom creatures in just a notebook, you can do that. You're just going to need to reference charts from the books, and it takes a bit longer to then write out the thing. And it makes sharing those things harder. And for creatures and improvising encounters, what I do for my in-person games is I would take sticky notes and stick them into my bestiary. And if it was hanging out at the top of the book, that was a boss monster. Out of the side of the book meant it was about an on-level monster, and from below the book meant it was a level minus monster. And I would refer to that as flagging my monster manual or my bestiary or whatever book I'm doing it in. So that way, whenever the players go somewhere and I need to make an encounter, I can flip through my boss monsters, flip through my normal encounters, and do all that from where the sticky notes are hanging out of the physical book. The reason I don't bring the physical books to those meetings is because they're big and bulky, and I already carry enough stuff with me because I bring all my dice, laptop, maps, etc. And it's just one fewer thing that I need to carry, which is actually like 4 fewer things I need to carry. And if a digital tool makes your life easier, there is no shame in using it. There's no shame in using a calculator if you want to use it to help with the calculation part of the game. Yeah, anyway, that's my soapbox as the editor, so back to the main video. Take it away, other me, I guess. And so I want to go into how we deal with other parts of the game system now. And the first thing I want to talk about is, of course, initiative, because, well, in a combat, that's the first thing you do. And so what I do is I hand all my players a little sticky note. And these were just from my student store, which is right next to where I have the game for a school club. And it comes in different colors. So I have a blue one, orange one, a green one. Like, I just have a handful of them around. And for each player, I will hand them a sticky note and tell them to roll initiative, write down their name and their initiative onto the sticky note. And I will tell them to sort it themselves. And I'll roll initiative for all the monsters on a different color, and then have them put the monsters in the initiative where they should be, and then top to bottom, it is then a fully ordered initiative list, color-coded between player and monster. And you as the GM, just roll initiatives and write them down. That is all it takes to get an initiative going. Oh, and if somebody delays, because, that's kind of hard to deal with in pencil and paper, right? You pick up the sticky note, you put it somewhere else. I know, completely mind-blowing stuff. But that's the type of thing you're going to be hearing for the rest of this video. It is a lot of, I have this one little thing that just makes a part of the game way easier to run. And so in terms of HP, that's an old trick that I learned from being in the D&D 5e space, funnily enough, where instead of you trying to track all the creature's HP yourselves, you say, you, that player there, I know you know what you're doing, so I'm going to give you some more work. And that is, you write down how much damage the party has done to that monster. So when they do damage to the monster, write down how much, and I'll come by and compare it to their max HP occasionally. That's it. So now as the GM, you're not doing a bunch of math and a bunch of maintenance behind the screen in between every single turn. You say, okay, you're doing damage. All right, moving on, and you're more able to direct the flow of the game and let the other person deal with the HP tracking. And you probably in your group have one player that is more invested than the others and understands what's going on a little bit more, and that's usually the player you want to have tracking the HP numbers. Like if I was a player at your table, I would actively ask you to give me these little number sheets, because I know that I do a good job tracking it, and I want to have stuff to do that isn't doom scrolling between turns. So it's a good thing to have your players track those HPs. But of course, in combat, knowing when your creatures are going and how much HP they have doesn't matter if you don't have maps. And people say that drawing and making maps is very time consuming. And to that, I say, I bought a bunch of grid paper off of Amazon. And then I just sketch out the map really quickly on this inch grid paper. And for minis, I rip up corners off of these pieces of paper, because these are 3 inches by 3 inches, again, bought from my student store because that's the shop I have nearby. And then I have a player draw like a face or something on this that represents their character. So like a gunslinger would draw a gun. The more artistically inclined players would draw like a little portrait on there. But as long as it is unique for your character, you can do it on these these little corners. And monsters get a different color, so it's color-coded. I like keeping things color-coded, if you can't tell. That's one of my things. I think it just makes the game a lot more visually digestible, is how I'd put it. Yeah, that is how I do my default encounter. I do actually have a wet erase board, which you will see on screen now with one of the initiative lists on it. And I will do that if I think they're going to be using a map several times. So like we had a few sessions where they were on a boat. So you can see I had the boat drawn up on that map, but they were doing an underwater fight. It's just that I didn't want to pull that map off to pull out a different blank grid. I just said, ignore the boat drawing. That was good enough. All right. Well, the other complaints I hear about is the players will forget if they have things. To which I say, you know what I do to make players remember they have hero points? Handouts in the form of index cards. You know what I do to remind players about mythic points? I give them 3 sticky notes at the start of the session. They turn back in for their mythic stuff. So that's visually there of this is how much I have. If you give your players a consumable item, give them a physical object that they can see in the real world that represents that item so they won't forget it. Does it take a little bit of effort if you want to write the full rules text down onto one of those things? Yeah, it does take a bit of effort. But if you want to get really fancy, you could then print out pieces of paper. It's kind of hard to see because of the glare, but you can put text on a normal piece of paper, put it inside a card sleeve with something else behind it to give it some thickness, and you can then have really nice custom handouts. And I make this template just by making a 3x3 grid in Google Docs and just cutting them out. So if you have a printer, you can do something like this pretty simply. I find stuff like that to be pretty overkill a lot of the time. So I don't really do the big fancy handouts. I think they're more effort to make than they're usually helpful. If I'm with brand new players and I want to remind them of what loot drops they have, I might make them. So if I was doing a beginner box thing, I'd do that, but generally I don't have too many issues with that other than normal players' anxiety of what if the item is better later, but like that's not an in-person versus digital thing. That's just a my players don't like spending consumables thing, which is psychology. And if anybody has a way to out-compete human psychology, let me know in the comments below because I am sure looking for answers. In any case, now we are on the final part of this video. And it's probably a part that a lot of you skipped to because I mentioned it earlier in the video. So hey, welcome back. And we are going to be talking about how I do conditions. And for this, I'm going to give a few different solutions. And then the end of the video will be like a mental math type thing of how you can make that easier. So for conditions, you could make handout cards like I did before for each of the conditions. And you have the effect of that condition written down. I saw on Reddit, like somebody made a card for like, what does fear do? And instructs them to put a die on top of the card to tick down from what type of fear they have. So like they'd use a D6 on 3 on top to represent frightened 3. I think that's a very clever solution. And then you can have the players track their own status conditions with their dice and like, that is a way to do it. The other way we do it is track it right next to the initiatives by using yet more sticky notes, putting it next to that player's initiative and then writing down what status they have, or having the players just like, have that sticky note themselves and then remember their status conditions and then they do that there. And for monsters, I'll definitely write it next to the monsters spot in initiative, what conditions they have. But like, after that, it really wasn't difficult to track conditions. I just kind of like, writing on a sticky note. Because with how I do initiative, with how I naturally run those games, I expect the players to keep track of a certain number of things. And I have systems in place to keep track of the monsters things in ways that are not mentally taxing for the GM. So I never really struggled with keeping track of conditions. It's always just kind of been a thing that's been intuitive enough. Like, the bard will remind people that Inspire Courage is going on when they roll something relevant. It's honestly not felt like a problem. I do know that some of the complaints about conditions is due to the mental math component and not the tracking component. So I want to tell you how we do that mental math. And so for this, I draw a hard line where if you are a player, you calculate your total modifier for the thing you are rolling, right? So if you're making an attack as a player, you calculate what your 2-hit is. You do not factor it off guard. You do not factor in anything on the enemy. I will factor that in as the GM. Let me worry about all the things about the target. You worry about all the things for yourself. That right there has cut the amount of moving parts any individual player needs to deal with in half. Because now the player is going, okay, so I have this number, because like if they aren't a mathematically inclined person, guess how they are rolling? They're going like this. So then they say, okay, so I got 27. I'm inspire couraged. So that's actually 28. And they say, I got a 28. Then I look at the monster's AC of baseline 30, and I see that they're off guard due to flanking. So I then go, okay, 28 versus 28. That's a hit. That's all you need to do. There's also other things, like if you have a -2 and a +2, you can effectively just read the number off the sheet. But I don't really think I want to make more content about mental addition tricks. I do think that every problem you have running this game in person can be solved by a creative application of very simple tools, and by letting the players take on more of the tracking burden. Because if you're the GM trying to track everything by yourself, using only pencil and paper and no other like visible player focused tools, it is going to be hard and near impossible. I admit that. But I think that if you are honestly trying to run this game in person, you should be ready to divide that workload up a little bit. And I think that once you do divide up that workload, the game becomes really easy and really fun. So I hope this guide was helpful, and I'll catch you all in the next one.